because he's kind of smart, but, man, just not a good person away from the field. Yeah. Oh, what's up, JP?
Hey, Ryan, good
Jon
to see you.
Morosi.
Hey, let's not forget who found that lunch spot our first day in Taipei. Okay, let's
Correct.
not forget.
Dude, we were walking around in circles, man, looking for this like hole in the wall place in Taipei. This was in when was this? In November? Yeah, November, right?
November, Premier 12,
God,
right?
Man, time flies. Yeah, November. We're walking around in circles, sweating too. Yeah. I'm like, JP, where are we going?
And he found it.
He found it. It was legit.
Of course he did. Of course he did.
I'm still like my stomach is still full from that meal from November.
That was a great meal and surpassed only by the quality of the company, my friend. Great to be with you then,
look at that.
and now as well.
We love it. We love talking baseball with Jon Morosi. Well, Jon, before we get into the what's going on with the Mariners and the Yankee series and what's been going on lately, I just want to get a quick reaction to the big news. Pete Rose, Shoeless Joe Jackson have been removed from MLB's permanently ineligible list. What's your feeling about that?
Well, a couple things. Number one, let's be clear about what it says and what it doesn't say. What it says is that it's now the interpretation of the commissioner's office and Commissioner Rob Manfred that ineligibility, that being on the permanent ineligible list, is a condition and status that exclusively refers to one's ability to be employed by a major league team or influence and be involved and associate with the Major League Baseball community in a direct. And so the interpretation now, therefore, means that that ineligibility expires at the time of a person's death. This does not mean, I stress, does not mean that Pete Rose is going into the Hall of Fame or is even likely going to go to the Hall of Fame. What it does mean, though, is that it's now a matter for the Baseball Hall of Fame to consider. And there is a mechanism in place where people who are part of the Historical Review Committee will consider the candidacy of Rose at the appropriate time. I believe it's 2 years from now. And we will see what happens at that point. It is far from a sure thing, in my estimation, that Rose would make it onto the ballot for that group, let alone be approved by 3/4 of that group. It's a very, very steep hill to climb. But now he has a path. And I understand the rationale of the commissioner's office in making this decision. I would not personally vote for Rose in my circumstance. I would not feel comfortable with voting him. And indeed, the baseball writers, when there was one brief time where via write-in there was some sort of gap in the system of how he was considered, there was a brief moment in time where he actually appeared on the writer's ballot and was not well supported at all. So I do not believe this means that he will posthumously be elected into the Hall of Fame. I could be surprised by that, but this strictly has to do with MLB's by-the-books ruling, and that's where it sits as of this day. It's certainly a day I did not expect would happen as recently as 6 months ago, but here we are.
So just to be clear for the listeners, that this ruling today does not mean that Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson are now on the ballot to be voted upon.
Correct. There is a process. So there is. I love the question because it gets into the really granular parts about the Hall of Fame that I quite enjoy talking about. So we now have what are called era committees. The colloquial description for a long time was the Veterans Committee, because that committee is a 12-person committee that, or 16, that includes a combination of Hall of Famers, historians, writers, executives who have been in the game for a long time. Someone like a Pat Gillick has been on committees like this in the past. And so there's actually a screening committee first to consider names from a particular era. The dividing line is up till 1980 and then 1980 to present. I would expect that Rose will be on the first of those because the Big Red Machine, he's a 1970s player for all practical purposes. So he'll be considered on that ballot, the one that deals with the pre-1980. So again, in December of 27, he'll be considered. And so that committee will vet that group. Even if he makes it onto the ballot, then you're going to need to have 12 of the 16 electors to say, yes, I believe he deserves a spot. And so I just think that because of the somewhat deep-seated issues with Rule 21, gambling on baseball, the Pete Rose case is familiar to many. I think it's still a significant uphill climb, but he has a pathway which was not the case as recently as yesterday, and certainly for a long time, I never thought we'd get to this spot. But Rose's attorneys have made an appeal. We know President Trump made statements in support of Rose's case. I suppose it's possible that played some role here, and now we have to wait a long time, a couple years, but at least Rose now has a path that he didn't have before.
Yeah, JP, I've got a million questions about this, but I do want to switch gears with the Seattle Mariners and what we're currently seeing. A team last year that, arguably the best rotation in baseball. Now all of a sudden they're having some real struggles with this rotation. Can you see this team surviving and winning the AL West? Now I know George Kirby and Logan Gilbert are coming back, but let's say hypothetically, let's say at best they stay mid-range in their pitching. And, Bryce is having all kinds of issues, so is Luis Castillo. Can this team still be a team that wins the AL West with the current state of the starting pitching that we're seeing, or maybe a little bit better than what we're seeing, but not the elite of what we saw last year?
I do not believe they can win with the status quo of their starting rotation. So one of two things has to happen. Either Kirby and Gilbert have to come back and be something close to themselves, not necessarily 100% of what the numbers have been in the past, but let's say 80 or 90%. Or Castillo and Miller have to really get going again. Or they've got to add somebody from the outside. And fortunately for them, there should be a number of arms available depending on which teams are willing to move different assets. I look at a team like potentially Minnesota, depending on how things play out with them. They've played better of late, certainly, but Pablo Lopez, the one-time Mariner prospect, is someone that I would keep an eye on. But the general statement is that I do not believe that the current path for this team will be enough. Now, there's still a way to improve internally, and I'm sure that as a coaching staff and as individuals, they're working towards that. But they're going to have to be better. And some would say, well, John, how is that true, given the fact that they've still been a leading team in this division for so long? And that's true. But I think we all see this and realize the current burden on the bullpen and the current burden on the lineup is probably not sustainable. Munoz is throwing, I think, way too often. Certainly hasn't been the case the last 4 days or so, but he really has a heavy workload. And I worry about the way in which the bullpen has had to be utilized to keep this team in games. The lineup has done a very admirable job of keeping them in games and helping them win, but I just think that they need some help, whether it's a short-term pitcher to have acquired from the outside as a pending free agent. They have the prospects to do it, but this is where we need to see, I think, a little bit of well-timed aggressiveness from the front office to make this a reality.
What's your take on what we've seen from Luis Castillo? He's the oldest in the rotation, the highest paid. He's the guy that's got the longest track record. You know what he's been and what he's capable of, but I felt like he's been solid for the most part this year. He's a guy that doesn't go deep. He's not a guy that gives you 7, 8 innings, anything like that. But this last start, he got touched up. He's walked a lot more. He and Bryce Miller lead the team in walks. His velo's down. Are we just seeing a guy who's just the age is starting to creep in, or do you just look at this as I don't know, early season struggles? He'll find his rhythm. How do you view Castillo?
Probably a combination of the two, Bob, but I think you said a really important word, which is age. And Ryan, I'm sure, can speak to what every pitcher goes through at a certain point in their careers when they have to adjust, whether it's adjusting their in-between starts routine, adjusting their repertoire, adjusting how they prepare for a season in terms of their off-season work, which obviously it's too late to do that for 2025. But there often is a point for a pitcher, and it sometimes happens right around the age that Luis is right now, where adjustments need to be made. And that's what I see right now. He's not done. He's not finished. There's nothing that I'm seeing that would suggest that. But the command needs to get sharper. I think the pitch execution has to get sharper. There's some things where in terms of the stuff and the action on pitches, it can be really, really hard to improve upon that during the course of the season when you have to answer the bell every fifth day, and that's a difficult thing, and Ryan can speak to that. But the pitch execution and the consistency have to improve, and I think that maybe that means varying certain things as you get to be a pitcher now in his early 30s. He's still, I think, a good major league pitcher. Is he elite right now? He's not elite right now, but there is still a path to getting back. You look at someone like a Seth Lugo, who has been really creative in how he executes pitches. So there's a path, even in today's velocity-obsessed times, Bob and Ryan, there's a way to still be effective, and I just think that Luis is still going through it. Unfortunately, it's happening at the same time where they'd love to have Gilbert, they'd love to have Kirby, and George is, of course, getting closer, and Miller's walking a lot of guys. You can't walk this many guys. That is what has me a little more worried than I was maybe 10 days ago or so for this team. Is just, you look at even a team with a decent lineup like Toronto, like a lot of runs scored, and last night, ton of runs scored. So that's the big test right now is this pitching staff going to throw enough strikes to be able to beat good lineups? And right now it's an open question based on what we've seen the last 4 days. Hey,
JP, last year, I think it was May 3rd, Luis Ariz was traded from the Marlins, which was kind of strange to see a big name get traded in May. Do you feel like in 2025 this year that there could be some early trade deadline moves happening in May? And just going back to it, because you mentioned the fact that Mariners could essentially look externally to add an arm and stuff like that. But do you feel like there would be a lot of competition in May? And if so, how would that look for 2025?
Yeah, I do think it's possible that there are certain teams, the Marlins are one of them, that always seem to be open for business. The White Sox could be too, although interestingly, the White Sox rotation has now gotten younger and better to where I'm not really sure that I see a White Sox pitcher that will be available to everybody unless it's a really, really good baseball trade. The Mariners probably would have to give up one of their better young players in the system to get an impact starter at this stage. You look around and the prices tend to drop a little more as you get closer towards the deadline, at least for the pending free agent. A team like Pittsburgh, which has, I think, a solid rotation and may be able to move some of their pitching. Colorado is a fascinating case. Of course, they just fired Bud Black over the weekend. They hired Warren Schaefer, who's a longtime minor league coach and manager. I think he's got a great future, but it's going to be a hard team to manage right now. The Rockies are interesting. And on some level, you would say, well, sure, you should give up Marquez or give up Freeland because you clearly are not going anywhere right now in the National League West. But they're just worried about putting together a competent major league performance and having a major league product on the field to where I think they're going to have to be really cautious about when they pull the plug, so to speak, on actually making moves. So there are teams out there. The Marlins are one of them. The White Sox in the right deal, though I wouldn't look for it right now. The Pirates, I think the Marlins and Pirates are probably the two teams that I would look to that might be of the mind to make a move a little sooner. And then stunningly, how about the Baltimore Orioles? A team that we didn't think at all was going to be a seller. Maybe Tomoyuki Sugano becomes available. He was, of course, signed to a short-term deal with the Orioles, and I think he'd actually pitch really well in Seattle. He'd be a great fit in Seattle. So Sugano, again, the Orioles, because of their success last season, they cannot make a sell decision right now and start moving assets on May 13th. But I think as you get closer to the early days of July, maybe it becomes a bit more practical. And in fairness to the Mariners, Ryan, they probably want to say, listen, let's assess how we look once Gilbert and Kirby come back,
right,
and then we can determine how much of our minor league depth we're willing to move. So I think for now, for the Mariners, I think their focus has to be internal, maybe a waiver claim here or there, but the big-time shopping, I think, has to come later on in the process.
John, we always appreciate you, my friend. Thanks so much. Great stuff, and we'll do it again next week.
You got it, guys. Always enjoy it. Have fun tonight. Always exciting when the Yankees are in town, so can't wait to watch the game this evening.
Thanks, John.
All the best. Thank you.
There you go. There's Jon Morosi with us each and every week. Always a fun conversation.